so I want to go over this before I begin. I don't want to infringe on anybody, so we're going to call these ham bones. It's going to be close to a certain particular kind of meat tube you may buy to weight your axle down. But we're going to start out with basically an 1/8 inch MIP by 4 inch brass nipple. We're going to have 2 of them. You're going to need 2 of these hacksaw dowel calipers so you can measure how long you need them for the coat. You're going to need a razor knife to trim some things out of the way, and your handy dandy my Harbor Freight toolkit. They're $6. Pick one up if you don't have one. They're awesome. I have 2 or 3 of them. So we're going to start, disassemble the axle as usual. We're going to separate the case. So we're going to pull the screws out, pop the end caps off, take the 4 screws out of the differential area on the back axle. Same for the front. We're going to take and pull the 4-link truss off, or the 4-link upper link truss, the C-hubs, and pop them off and separate this as well. This is all part of my my daughter's build that I was talking about, which is the eBay Chinese scx10 based rock bouncer. It's just going to be a crawler. It's a rock bouncer cage, but I'm going to repurpose that thing. So anyway, this is what this is about. I'm going to show you guys how to weight your axles and strengthen your axles on a budget. So I'm going to cut. We're going to come back. This stuff's going to be taken apart. I'm going to show you guys what you have to do to get this going. We got all apart. And being that basically your front and rear axle is the same, except for the end pieces and either the spindles to turn or the straight end pieces for the axle itself. Okay, so I'm just going to show you one of them. You get the gist for that one over there. It's going to be the same process. So now that this is apart, this is where your razor knife comes in. And basically, to give you a heads up of how we're going to do this, which, by the way, these 1/8 inch MIP by 4s can be found in any hardware store for anywhere $7 to $8. Has very good weight to it. Very good weight to it. But what we're going to do is, we know that there's a bearing that sits here, and we know that there's also a bearing that sits inside of here, which is also on the end of the axle here. So you know that this goes in like this. You get your pin, your hex nut. This slides onto the end like so. You get it. Okay. So what we want to do is, we know this axle is this long. We have our housing here. We're basically going to cut this down to where it fits into here, and will come out just past your joint here, but we don't want to interfere with the bearing. So we know this goes here, locks into the differential, but we don't want to jam this into the bearing when we make our cut. Now, that's getting ahead of ourselves here. I'll show you how to do all that. So the reason you need your razor knife, right in here, you see these little tabs on both sides of the axle, and they're in both sides of the casing. Okay, we need to remove those tabs. Just take your razor knife carefully, get down in here behind it. If I had a razor knife worth a damn. Usually when you get it behind there, you'll feel it. It'll just take off. Like so. So, you can see that now. That tab is gone. It's a nice, smooth bore. Just like that. So we're going to do that. We're going to repeat that 3 more times on this axle. So you're going to do this total of 4 times on one axle housing. We'll be right back. Got our tabs all cut out. So as you can see now, It's a nice smooth bore. There's no tab there on the casing. Okay. The reason we did that, that now allows that to sit in there. It's not blocked off anyway. Sits nice and flush with the axle casing. Okay, see? Okay. So, we've got old spare differential here. Let me throw this thing in just for our bearing measurement. Okay. We have an axle. What we're going to do is we're going to insert the axle into the diff. Alright. So this bearing's fully seated. That's fully seated. This is what it looks like while it's all closed up. So this is where our dowel caliper comes into play. We want to measure, let's see, we'll turn it on and we'll zero it out. There we go. We want to measure how long this tube needs to be. Now, we don't want it to touch bearings, okay? So it don't have to be exact either. So we could say we can cut our tube at 65 millimeters and clear both bearings. Works for me. So we have a tube here. Start at the end. 65 millimeters is going to put us, say, right here. So you'll need a pin or something to mark your tube. And then once you mark your tube, you will take it to the bench vise. Damn, about lost that word. Take it to the bench vise, and you're going to cut it to the length you want. So, just so you got that down, I'll cover it one more time before I go to a cut. Mock-up diff, mock-up axle. The distance between the axle flange here, that sits into the bearing, it's the actual little flange on the axle, and then a flange right here on this bearing. You just want to be just inside of them. You don't have to touch both sides. And the reason you want is because you don't want this brass piece in there knocking around on your stuff. So we're going to run that right there. 65 millimeters should be adequate. Now, it's going to be different for the front axle. And the reason being, your front axle bearing and your front axles aren't this long. So your front tubes, actually, what you're going to cut off, it's probably going to fit just right in your front axle. Alright, so got my tubes cut. So here's what you're going to do. Pull the axle out of the housing. Pull your end bearing off. Take your tube, slide your axle through it. Lay it in there and lock your axle into the differential, like so. Okay? You're thinking, alright, awesome, we're done here. Put the bearing back on the end, put the casing back together. But no, unfortunately, that's not the case. And I'm going to show you why. Okay? So, we cut the little tab out in here. And you're thinking, well, that's cool, there's meat there to grab. Yeah, there is. But, when you run this screw in, like so, you're going to notice you're going to get to a point right there. And you stop. There's about a millimeter there. That screw still has to go. And it can't because, well, there's a brass tube in the way. So what you want to do is mark it. And I did forget to mention in the tools needed, you are going to need a drill bit. If you want to thread it to where you want to actually make your axle stronger, you can use a 5/64 bit and an M3 tap. M3 by, I think it's 0.5. Yeah. Or you can just do like I'm about to do and drill an 1/8 inch, I'm sorry. Yes, an 1/8 inch hole in it to where the screw can recess itself. So if you notice, tightening that down, the screw actually marked itself for us. So we're going to put this back on, put the casing back on. Okay. And our mark's still there. So run this in, run it down tight. like so. Don't strip it out, just put tension on it. And then we'll move to the other side of the axle. Put one on this side. Run it down tight. Don't strip your plastic out. And that's all we got there. So you see, they don't want to bed all the way. But we're going to fix that. Again, this is just a way to enjoy the hobby and modify your vehicle without having to spend a good bit of cash. I'm not discounting any products out there. Not what this is about. This is about being frugal, if you will. So we got a mark there, and we got a mark there. So I'm going to take this over to the vise. I'm going to drill these out. Same thing with this one here. And I'll come back and show you guys how to final assemble this. Got our holes drilled out on both tubes. And like I said, if you want to thread them, 564-bit M3 with a 0.5 tap. And you can actually take your screw to where it'll actually thread into the tube, into the axle, and really strengthen your axles up. So, alright, back to this. Pull your end bearing off. Pull your axle out. Slide your axle into the tube. And put your axle back in the diff. Line your holes up. Line the case up. I'm going blind in my old age. Alright. Slide your cap on. Whoops, let's not forget the bearing. Get ahead of myself here. Slide that in there. Slide our end cap on. Now, our screw sets all the way in like it's supposed to. Now, sometimes you will notice, like it just did on me, I don't know if you can see in that hole or not, the brass has slipped to the side slightly. When it does that, the same hex head you're using to tighten the screws, you can actually stick in that hole and wiggle around, and it'll line that brass back up for you. Just something I had to figure out the hard way, doing this over and over. Seated. See, nice and flush. I don't like how this one looks. Let's check this guy out. It doesn't seem like it's seated properly. Let's see. Yeah, a little off. I'm getting there. Wiggle it around a little bit. There we go. There you go. Now, you have just successfully added weight to your axle. I know it doesn't look like much because these are just little brass tubes, but in all seriousness, one of these fully, I would say, weighs 14, 15 ounces, 13 ounces. I don't have a gram scale, so I can't really tell you exactly how many it weighs. Grams or ounces, maybe the package says, maybe not. Nope. So, but there you have it, guys. For $7-8, you can weight your axle with ham bones instead of spending $35-40 on some meat sticks or whatever you want to call them. And like I said, this video isn't to discount anybody's product. I'm not bashing on anybody's product. The originator of products like this are innovators. You know, the name of the game with these toys and these trucks is low center of gravity, and that is probably one of the best things somebody came up with. And as I stated before, this is just a way to do it cheaper, if you will, frugal. The entrepot man's way of getting things done. And after all, they're toys, you know. We don't have to spend a fortune on these things to have them perform like, you know, the people that do. It's all about a little bit of physics, a little bit of home ingenuity, and you can make things work. Moving on to the front axle. Now, the back axle, you've got the gist of it. Don't forget upon reassembly, check your diffs, check your gears, throw some grease in there. I personally use Utter Butter. I've got quite a few samples. Thanks to those guys for that. No, I'm not sponsored by any particular person, but that's just what I use. Works great. So on the front axle, if you remember on the back, when I said you'll have 4 tabs on a casing to cut. I hope you didn't jump the gun, take both of them apart and cut both of them, because on the front, you need these. And the reason you need these is because that's where your bearing seats. Because your front axles are actually shorter until they get to this point where your C-hub bolts on and your spindle. Okay? So you need this on the front. Now, if you remember, we have those scraps from where we cut the rear axles. Well, these little guys right here fit just perfect in here. So you pretty much get the idea. Slide the axles in. Lock it in the diff. There it is. Lock it in the diff. Same thing for the other side. Put your bearing where it goes. Slide your axle in. Lock it in your diff. There we go. So now, we'll put the casing back together. If I get it lined up right. We're being dumb. Alright now. There we go. As you can see, the copper's hidden, or I'm sorry, the brass is hidden. You don't have to worry about drilling out because it stays behind your bearing seat where your bearing is. And these screws on top don't quite go deep enough to hit the brass. But when you assemble both of these, make sure you have free movement. Make sure you're not binding in any way. You don't hear anything scratching, nothing like that. And like I said, service your diff while you're in here. And while the front axle isn't going to be as heavy as the rear axle, the front axle can receive things like aluminum C-hubs, aluminum spindles. Some of your front tie rods are stainless. That also adds weight. And this is where I come into saying that you can use a gram scale. Figure out what your tubes you put in the back weighed. Figure out what your scraps that you put in the front weigh. And then weigh your aluminum C-hubs and your aluminum spindles and your new stainless rod and see if you match. If you match, you're good. A lot of people prefer more weight over the front end. As I covered before, you can put weight in the tires. I've got some weight under bumper of a truck. There's a couple different ways to add weight. But sure you guys know how to reassemble that. And that's all I've got for now. Like I said, everything you see me doing right now is going to be part of my daughter's rock bouncer. I'm building her for Christmas. And I figured nobody really had a review on that specific cage. And I'll show it to you again. A lot of pictures online. People say they're great, but I've not seen anything on YouTube yet as far as what works, what don't, people building them, thrashing them around. Are they good on the trail? What's the weight balance like? What's the wheelbase like? So I'm going to figure that out for you guys. I'm going to be the one to put the video out as I build it through its process. And just kind of share some tips and tricks as I go along. I'm not going to worry about putting that back on. I've got aluminum trusses coming. But as we go, I'll be installing a overdriven front diff. So I'm not going to assemble this back right now. I'm waiting on the diff to come in the mail. Other than that, stay tuned. There's more coming.